While forging closer ties with Russia across multiple fronts, North Korea has also shown signs of improving relations with China since the beginning of this year. In contrast, despite President Trump sending multiple signals for dialogue since returning to the White House, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has yet to respond. Amid rapidly shifting global dynamics, what lies ahead for Northeast Asia? We'll unpack these questions with our expert guest, Professor Won-gon from the Department of North Korean Studies at Ewha Women's University. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me. Finally, I'm here.
Yes.
I'm one of your biggest fans of your show. So I heard that you started this show 6 months ago. So I keep wondering when you are going to invite me. But this, I heard that the last show, but finally I've been invited. So I'm very glad that be here.
Thank you. We are very glad that finally we can see you here. Well, actually, while the ceasefire talks continue regarding the war in Ukraine, some predict that Russia's reliance on the DPRK may wane ultimately after the war. But others also argue that probably President Putin will continue to engage with Chairman Kim Jong-un in the coming months or years. How do you see the future of the two relations?
Well, there are two very contrasting kind of speculation about the future of the North Korea and Russia relations. And you just mentioned that first one is that they are going to continue to have this very close cooperation with each other. Of course, from the Russians' point of view, even though it would end the war in Ukraine, and Russia still remained in some kind of isolate from the world scene, especially I don't think Russia can have any meaningful exchange with European country. For that purpose, Russia needs some kind of support and cooperation with North Korea. From the North Korean perspective, we all know that North Korea is also under the diplomatic isolation, and also you know that for past 2 years, Kim Jong-un is kind of mentioned that one of his great achievement for his for past 2 years is have a very enhanced cooperation with Russia. So for the domestic purpose, definitely Kim Jong-un need this kind of a relationship. And finally, well-known fact that we don't know exactly how much and what kind of things, but pretty clear that North Korea received some kind of compensation from Russia. So then in that sense, they're going to continue to have a very close cooperation. But on the other hand, there would be some possibility that weakened or they less cooperate with each other compared to the past 2 years. And especially I'm kind of quite interestingly follow the path of the President Trump's kind of engagement with Russia. And many people are saying that the United States bring Russia into their orbit in order to counter China. So if it continues that, and it's going to be a very huge challenge for North Korea, because you know that North Korea is trying to build some kind of a new code or block and scheme. It means that, of course, North Korea wanted to bring China, Russia, and Iran, even so-called anti-American countries together. And then in that kind of a block, North Korea want to be a nuclear weapon state and want to have some alternative economic model, and it's like the Cold War period. So in that sense, if Russia would be more close to United States, it's going to be such a huge challenge for North Korea. And the other thing is that economically, we all know that from North Korea's perspective, Russia is not the compatible partner, because what the North Korea need at this moment is the technology, investment, and market. But Russia is not enough to bring this kind of a need and necessity for the North Korea. So we are going to see, but it's going to be a quite tough time between these two countries in terms of their relations. But I'm kind of wondering how you perceive the future of these two countries' relationship.
Well, actually, the critical question that I have in mind is whether these ties has been driven by shared interests and shared values with a common identity, or is it driven by a pragmatic opportunism? Well, if North Korea is opportunistic and trying to have a bandwagoning out of, in order to have some profit out of it, well, these relationship may change in the coming months or years. Obviously, the trade between energy assistance and military assistance to Russia may be beneficial for both of them. And they don't care much about the reputational cost when it comes to military cooperation, because the Ukraine war actually has been continuing. But after the Ukraine crisis, well, the trigger is gone, because the Ukraine crisis created an opportunity for both of them to try something new. But Russia has continuously expressed its intention to re-engage with South Korea. And previously, Russia also supported UN Security Council resolutions on imposing pressure on North Korea. So, well, we can expect that North Korea-Russia relationship may go back before the situation before the Ukraine crisis. And the cost involved so far has been quite minimal. In order to maintain an alliance between the two countries, there should be some kind of a sunk cost to increase the credibility of their alignment through institutional mechanism. But there has been no joint military exercises, no joint investment in defense industry, and there has been no institutionalized mechanism to provide military support when there is a crisis. So given that very limited cooperation in scale and depth, I think, well, things may change in the future.
Well, if I add a couple of things, I definitely agree with that, the speculation. And first thing I wanted to pay more attention is that the end of the Ukraine-Russian war, and Russia definitely needs some kind of new partner, and South Korea is one of these very strong candidates.
Yes.
I already mentioned that Russia could not have any meaningful economic exchange with European countries. So in other words, Russia could not go to their east and their west, and it means that they have to go to east. Already Putin mentioned that like a new east policy, and probably Siberia and this East Asia region, in order to develop, South Korea is probably one of the very strong candidates for the cooperation. So in that sense, it's going to be another, if it happened, it's going to be another huge challenge for the North Korea.
Yes.
And also institutionalized, and that's a very interesting point too. Even though the last year, June, they have a revival of so-called the de facto alliance treaty, but you and I, we all know that the two countries' relationship historically is like a marriage of convenience. They do not trust each other. So that's why I think North Korea decided to send the troops to the war in Ukraine, in order to, if something happened to the Korean Peninsula, it's going to be a precedent. For example, North Korea can say to Russia that we help you when you have a very difficult position. So it is time to you get back come to this Korean Peninsula. So this kind of precedent is far more important than treaty norms and principles in that two countries when we think about the characteristics of these two countries.
Yes, you're right on that point. And another major player is China, actually. Well, North Korea is also actively engaging with China recently, reestablishing media presence, and also revitalizing construction sites along the border, and also restarted tourism enjoyed by the Chinese. So, what's behind actually North Korea's motive to re-engage with China?
Well, we will see whether this is really kind of a starting point to re-engage by the China to North Korea or not. Because I said that we all know that for past almost more than 2 years, the relationship between China and North Korea has been, nothing but deteriorate. So we are seeing many kind of incident and event and evidence, and more. On top of that, the two countries' relations, historically one more time, they would not trust each other. You know that, especially the most representative case is 1956, the August Faction incident. At the time, you see, the Soviet and also China's backed factions to criticize Kim Il-sung. Actually, their goal is to step down Kim Il-sung, but Kim Il-sung is successfully counterattack them to purge. But right after purge, and Mao Zedong of China at the time, he pressured on Kim Il-sung to reinstate all the purged people. And after that time, Kim Il-sung has an interview with one of the media. He said that I was pretty much frustrated. And he said, I no longer believe or trust in China. So, and then that's the point. After that point, North Korea announced so-called independent diplomacy. So all those historical things clearly mention that these two countries' relationship is not based on the so-called, what they call the blood alliance or the very close and tips and lips and tips and those kind of things. And then also remind me 2023, September, when Kim Jong-un has met Putin in Russia, and Kim Jong-un said that the number one priority for the North Korean diplomacy is the relationship with Russia. So my question at the time, then what about China? All those things that put these two countries' relationship, I mean China and North Korea, in a very awkward position. So you are mentioning that very recently that there are some news to try to resume this kind of normal relationship between two countries, but we will see. But one thing pretty clear is that in order to the North Korea, from the North Korean perspective, in order to doing something meaningful for the North Korea, they definitely need the Chinese support. For example, if North Korea finally decide to have a resume negotiation with the United States, and definitely North Korea need some kind of support from China. We have experience in 2018, 2019. And another thing is economically. I just mentioned that China is only one country that can support and supply the markets, investment, and all those things what the North Korea has needed. So for that purpose, the North Korea need to normalize relationship with China. But one thing is China trying to have some kind of distance, not to have a very close cooperation with North Korea, is that because of the North Korea's very close cooperation war in Ukraine, because you know that China is trying to have a good relationship with many of the European countries, but the Ukraine war is the easiest threat to the European country. That's why China is trying to have some, not to have a very close cooperation. So if the war would end it, then would be another round. And the very important factor I just mentioned is Sino-US relations. It's getting deteriorate, and we all know that China is trying to bring the North Korea in their orbit, no longer consider North Korea is a liability, rather than instead they are considered as an asset. So those kind of dynamic can be resumed in the near future.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the historical case of North Korea shifting side between Russia and China, because that highlights the fact that North Korea values strategic autonomy, right? So North Korea does not want to rely heavily on one single partner. So that's very meaningful. And in my opinion, as you mentioned, North Korea needs economic assistance. And in that regard, China is irreplaceable, right? Russia cannot play such a big role because currently North Korea's reliance on China on economic trade is up to 90%. And when it comes to strategic trade of strategic goods that is contributing to North Korea's WMD program, such as bearing parts, missile parts, and other machinery. Well, all that comes from China, not Russia, right? So considering Russia's limitations in technology, production capability, I think China's role cannot be replaceable. And you also mentioned the geopolitical dynamics as well. I think for China's point of view, one of the key concerns is probably alliance restraint controlling North Korea in the future, because China wants to have a regional stability, not instability. And one of the key mechanisms is making an alliance with the DPRK in order to prevent any kind of a crisis out of control. So in that regard, I think China is trying to re-engage with the DPRK so that it can keep such an influence.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, you are quite right. But at the same time, the relationship between these two countries is a very delicate one.
Yeah.
I mean, You are right that North Korea definitely need Chinese support, not only for strategic term, but also economic field too. But at the same time, we are just talking about the historical case. North Korea could not trust China, because I think China is the only one country, if they really want it, then the so-called regime change is possible, because they share the border and such a huge influence, and you said that 90% of economic exchange. And so that's why after Kim Jong-un got the power, he purged his uncle Jang Song-tae, and he allegedly killed his half-brother Kim Jong-nam, because both of figures are so-called pro-Chinese and Chinese favorite. So that's why Kim Jong-un is trying to get rid of all the competition. This is one of the very important nature between these two countries. So, as we both agree, that's the geopolitical dynamic, especially the relationship between China and United States, will make the China to bring the North Korea, re-engage the North Korea, but still there is some kind of limitation, and then I can see.
Of course, the problem here is North Korea has a very limited pool of partners. So that leads to the next question on the U.S. Yeah, obviously, President Trump is trying to re-engage with the DPRK, mentioning North Korea as a nuclear power. And more importantly, he mentioned North Korea along with India and Pakistan. So many people are wondering why President Trump is sending such a message.
I really ask the same question to you, because nobody knows what Trump is aimed for. But I carefully checked his statement about Kim Jong-un, and I can categorize in just two ways. First, he said that Trump had such a good relationship with Kim Jong-un. And the other thing is that Kim Jong-un would welcome me to come back to the White House. So, but from the Kim Jong-un's perspective, that's not true at all. We all remember that 2019 February Hanoi, that's such a huge humiliation for the Kim Jong-un. He could not get any kind of a deal with Trump. And so after that time, the two leaders' relationship, especially from the Kim Jong-un's perspective again, could not say that it's not the reliable or not fall in love or something like that. But the reason that Trump keep mentioning that is kind of a positive things in terms of relations, because still Trump wants to control the Kim Jong-un. So I think I already start kind of negotiation from the Trump's perspective. This is the typical way to have some kind of a control of the negotiation. So if I simply say that, Trump said to Kim Jong-un, I have such a good relationship. So if I would call you, you have to return, you have to answer my call. But from the Kim Jong-un's perspective, he wouldn't have any kind of this, repeat and deja vu of 2008, 2019. This time, Kim Jong-un definitely wanted to have a conditional dialogue, precondition. We all know that. And Kim Jong-un already mentioned a couple of times that if the United States would want to have any meaningful dialogue with North Korea, first thing that the United States to do is to stop permanent halt of the joint military exercise between South Korea and the United States and the deployment of strategic assets. And second one is that North Korea definitely want the arms reduction talk, arms control talk, not the denuclearization of North Korea at all. And third one is that North Korea wanted to be acknowledged by so-called de facto nuclear weapon state. So all those preconditions, at least one of two, would not met. Kim Jong-un would not come to the negotiation table. But Trump keeps saying that if I call you, you have to answer that. It's a kind of a very hard pressure from the Kim Jong-un's perspective to get from the Trump. So one more time, so what do you think about Trump's statement, and is there any chance that they would come to the negotiation table one more time as they did in 2008, 2019?
Well, in my opinion, President Trump alone can change his North Korean policy, but in a limited fashion, because there are many institutional and legal obstacles. For example, the U.S. has been pursuing very comprehensive non-proliferation policy. And beneath that, North Korea has been viewed as a proliferation concern because of its ties with Iran and Syria in the Middle East. So there is a concern about nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. So it's a very big issue for the U.S. And previously, the U.S. government has never deviated from its denuclearization policy, at least officially, right? So when it comes to arms control dialogue, well, the two sides may discuss it only if it can be part of an interim measure toward the denuclearization. Well, it can create some space for talks on risk reduction and threat reduction. Ultimately, that's what President Trump wants. But before that, there must be some preconditions, such as, North Korea's concrete commitment to be verified. And also, there may be huge concerns that has to be discussed within the Congress, because Congress has the key to provide anything. Even if the U.S. wants to set up a liaison office, it needs money that has to be approved by the Congress. And in order to improve the bilateral relations, up to, say, investor level, but it has to be, again, approved by the Senate by majority vote. And when it comes to lifting partially sanctions, the U.S. has to go through the UN Security Council. It is not easy because the existing UN Security Council resolutions, it's very, very clear, denuclearization and imposing sanctions without concrete actions borne by the North Korean side toward the denuclearization. Then, in order to lift the sanctions, then North Korea has to demonstrate something in return. And that in that process, the U.S. has to convince other permanent members of the UN Security Council that it is the right way to go. UK, France, they are very, very consistent in their demanding and denuclearization first. And China, Russia, I don't think they are very much pleased with the fact that they have to live with nuclearized North Korea in their neighborhood.
Well,
so
you are quite right. There are many people and do not think about the role of the U.S. Congress. You are right. In order to have some kind of meaningful relations, or at least partially lifting of sanction, and definitely need the contents of the U.S. Congress. And in many fields, including human rights issue, and there are 5 or 6 different laws, the U.S. domestic laws, to prohibit any kind of meaningful relationship with the North Korea. So that's one thing. And at this moment, what I'm worried most is that the Trump and Kim Jong-un may come up with some kind of agreement of the so-called the dual freeze. We have experienced it back in 2018. You remember that, because North Korea proclaimed that they're going to have a moratorium, not to have a nuclear test, and the ICBM. In return of that, Trump mentioned that halt, not the permanent, but the halt and scale down of the joint military exercise and deployment of the strategic asset. So it's possible that they come up with this kind of interim agreement between two countries. The problem is that the joint military exercise and also this deployment of strategic asset is really different meaning nowadays. You know that in this 2008, 2019, after that, South Korea, United States, they're trying to have enhanced institutionalized so-called extended deterrence. Those two are the main pillar of the extended deterrence. So if scale down or halt of these two things, it's going to be a huge security challenge for South Korea.
Yeah, you're right on that. With regard to the interim measures, there are 2 additional concerns. One is strong verification mechanism to be asked by the U.S. Second, there will be an attempt to broaden the agenda that may include freezing of North Korea's ICBM program. That may not be acceptable for the North Koreans for now. So finally, let's talk about South Korea. Well, given the U.S. is seeking a unilateral approach to the DPRK and North Korea's argument on two-state mechanism, well, probably there should be some kind of a coordination between South Korea and the U.S. on this matter. So what kind of role can South Korea play in the coming months?
Because the unpredictability of Trump, we are talking about the various issues, but it's totally dependent on Trump. We haven't expect the 2008, 2009, this kind of sudden summit between these two countries. So two things I emphasize always. First, we have to maintain the ultimate goal of the denuclearization of North Korea. Doesn't matter what the Trump would meet Kim Jong-un, have an interim agreement, or even the free dual freeze, doesn't matter. I mean, we cannot control the Trump's behavior, but if we have to have the stick of the ultimate goal, denuclearization of the North Korea. If we would give up this kind of a goal, and we don't have any kind of a diplomatic option at all, it's just remain the military option. And one thing I'm really worried, probably you too, because in Washington D.C., many people are mentioning that the denuclearization of North Korea is unrealistic goal. We have experienced the last year during the convention between both the Democratic and the Republican. Their platform, they simply omit the denuclearization of North Korea because they are saying that this is an unrealistic goal. So we have to stick this goal. The second one is that I just mentioned the extended deterrence. If Trump, of course, he's consider all the alliance relationship transactional way, and South Korea is one of the probably very strongly, he has a very negative view about this cost and sharing. And so extended deterrence is a very close relation, very closely related to this cost benefit calculation of the Trump. But we have to institutionalize, we have to continue to enhance the cooperation vis-a-vis extended deterrence. And I just mentioned if we, especially joint military exercise, deployment strategic asset, if stopped, then it's going to be a huge problem in our security, and also there would be a growing voice, a very strong voice that our own indigenous nuclearization. So I think at least we have to do these two things. So what about you? What do you think about what South Korea should do?
Well, first, a close coordination with the U.S. side. I think the U.S. cannot change the overall North Korea policy without close consultation with South Korea, because South Korea is a treaty ally, and there are many institutional mechanisms for that kind of consultation. So denuclearization issue is closely linked to alliance issues, and as long as the U.S. is trying to counterbalance China, the role of South Korea as an ally is very critical in the Indo-Pacific region. So there should be some kind of coordination, and South Korea should develop a very creative strategy to convince the U.S. that South Korea should play a key role in deciding the future path of the Korean Peninsula. So I think in turbulent time, we certainly need a very creative idea on how to navigate a web of challenges that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing your time and your insight.
Thank you for having me here.